They ask deep questions. What is a dream? Why do we have toes? Why is the moon round? What's the birthday of the world? Why is grass green? They just bubble right out of it.
We're happy to have you joining us for the QA Talk Show. This is a show where you can ask any question, no matter how embarrassing or silly or basic or whatever you think the question may be, with no judgment. A lot of us probably have the exact same questions, but for whatever reason, we're too afraid to ask. Each show will focus on a different topic, invite your questions, and be joined by guests to answer your questions. This is a non-judgmental space. The topic of this Q&A talk show is zero waste and about how to reduce what we buy and repurpose what we have. Aoife Blight joins this show to answer questions about how to save seeds, how to lower the waste we produce, how to regrow food from food scraps, and a lot more. Aoife puts out super handy tips on her Instagram account about how we can lower our waste without a lot of hassle or disruption. And she can be found at Zero Waste in the Vale, and that's VALE. Also, reminder that if you want our guests to answer your questions, make sure to send us a message with your question on any social media platform, and we will get it answered. So let's get into this Q&A Talk Show episode 3 about zero waste.
I'm Aoife. My name is Aoife. I'm from Dublin originally, but now I live in the town of Barry in South Wales. I love it here. It's got the seaside, it's got parks, but it's also where I really got to grips with how much plastic there is on the beaches and how much waste there is. I got into litter picking in a big way, and that's kind of what fueled me on with the zero waste as well as anything else. I'm a zero waster, or at least I'm a aspirational zero waster. I try to do my best to reduce the waste that we have in our home. We still produce waste, but we produce far less waste than we could be.
What is zero waste, and what do people mean when they say that? And is it sort of a concept or a mindset, or how would you describe zero waste?
Zero waste is considered to be a bit of a lifestyle, the lifestyle choice, really. The idea behind zero waste is following the 5 R's. So we all know the 3 R's of reduce, reuse, recycle. And the 5 R's take it a little bit further by starting with refuse. So it's refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle, and rot. That's immediately refusing anything that's single use in your life. So anything from plastic bags or even just receipts. If you don't need a receipt, don't take a receipt. Business cards, things like that, stuff that ends up at the bottom of your bag or just cluttering your life. You'll notice in that recycle, it's technically the last thing on the list, because once you've reduced your intake of, say, plastic or single-use items, or if you have those things in your life, you've found a reuse for them, you're reusing them somehow. If you can't reduce them and you can't reuse them anymore, then you recycle. But in the mainstream flow of things, people kind of automatically think, oh, it's okay, I can get that because I can recycle it. But as we're all becoming more aware now, recycling isn't the answer. We've been told for so long that recycling is going to fix everything. If we're good little citizens and we pop our plastic bottles or our plastic bags into the recycling, somebody else will take care of it and it'll be turned into something new. That's both true and not quite true. There are certain types of material that have infinite reuse and infinite recyclability. Those are things like tin, aluminium, glass, wood. Those things can be melted back down and formed into something that will have the same strength as the original item. Things that are made from plastic can be recycled. However, it depends on the type of plastic that's used. So for example, a hard plastic bottle can be recycled and can be made into something new, but the thing that's made from that recycled material will have less good quality. So it may be recyclable again later, but it will start to degrade every single time. So every time that item gets recycled, it loses some of its strength. Eventually just ends up as mush that can't be used. Like it'll go into polystyrene, which is just, you can't do anything with it. And then other types of plastics, like film plastics, are just so difficult to recycle because of the properties that they are made from. And I think probably because of the actual plastic type that's used in it, they won't get really used into anything of value. There's a hell of a lot of value in recycling and in recycling properly. However, once again, recycling properly is quite difficult for a lot of people because there's not really education around it, or they might not have the facilities near them. You could take a tin of tomatoes and you think, great, there's a tin of tomatoes, chopped tomatoes. That's metal, that's grand, I'll just throw it in the recycling. If it hasn't been cleaned out, then that one single can of chopped tomatoes is going to contaminate the entire batch of recycling, which is not great at all. Like, so if it gets stuck in with other things, it means that they can't clean all of those individual things. That's way too much of a resource, energy sap to actually try and do. It will cost them more than they will get from that recycling to try and clean all of that. So that means that that bunch of recycling ends up in landfill or it gets incinerated or something like that. It's a real shame. It can be quite difficult when you've got things that contain mixed materials. So we all know the coffee cup, the takeaway coffee cup, which for years we all thought was way better than the polystyrene coffee cups that they used to be giving out because they're made from cardboard. So yeah, that's going to be at least biodegradable, but they're all coated with a very thin layer of plastic, which is very difficult to separate out from the paper, which once again makes it more expensive to do. So everything is run on economics. So these things get collected and dealt with, but not in a way that we think is happening. We think that when we recycle, it's suddenly magically turned into this wonderful new item that gets used, but that's not always the case. We have to recycle, we have to try to recycle, but there are also other things that we can do to reduce the amount that we need to recycle in the first place. Zero Waste tries to get people to think of how they can deal with the stuff that they're bringing into their homes without having to recycle it, if that makes sense. Really, Zero Waste, this was all written down in a great book by a woman called Bea Johnson. And she's kind of the mother of the movement, but it's definitely grown from there. And from my perspective, there's way more than 5 R's. Like there's repair, reassess, thinking about what do you actually need in your life? Do you actually need those things in your life in the first place? Regrow. We do a lot of regrowing from veg scraps and stuff like that. Zero Waste, the hint is in the name, but it means different things to different people.
Could you give examples of what people can regrow?
Basically, you can regrow spring onions, are a classic, pop them into a jar of water and just snip off the stems as you need them kind of thing. And they will just continue to grow. You don't need soil, you can just leave them. I think it's basically hydroponics. And you can just leave them sitting there on your windowsill and they will regrow. Garlic is a good one, onions. I've seen people do carrots, but I've not tried it myself or I've not had any success. Oh yeah, and you can grow garlic from, just if you buy a bulb of garlic, rather than chopping it up for your lovely pasta, just throw it into plant it into the soil there, and it takes ages now. Garlic is a really slow grower, but next season you will have like a lovely set of garlic bulbs. Yeah, there's loads of stuff. What else do we do usually? Avocado. If you hang on to the pip, it'll take 10 years before you get any avocados, but you get a nice house plant in the meantime. Yeah, you can do loads of stuff, like just from your saved seeds from your fruit and veg as well. Like I've got chili peppers and tomatoes growing this year from seeds I saved from last year, and pumpkins. All of my tomato plants are grown from seeds from tomatoes from last year. Basically, just take the seeds and smear it on some toilet paper or any kind of paper that you've got handy. Newspaper will be fine. And then leave it to dry out for a couple of days. So obviously that would be something that you would do now if you're harvesting your tomatoes. And then next spring, pop them into a seed tray. I just get an egg box with some compost, put them in there and just keep them moist. You don't want to keep them soaking wet or anything like that. Keep them moist and they'll start sprouting. And then you just, same with any kind of seed growing, you just let them go. The one thing with growing from scraps, if your fruit or veg has come from the supermarket, then the seeds in those fruit and veg will be from hybrid plants. That's a plant that is a mash of 2 types of plant that will either give you, for example, a better flavor or a better color or a better size. So they've taken the traits of one really flavor-filled fruit and the traits of one really huge growing fruit and mashed them together. So when you grow plants from those seeds, you mightn't necessarily get the same fruit that you had eaten the previous year, if you know what I mean. It'll be whichever of those traits will be dominant in that seed will have come out. So you might get a huge fruit, but it won't be very flavorful, or you might get a tiny fruit, but it'll be really packing the punch with flavor. But it won't be what you have bought. The way to get around that is to try, if you can, get fruit and veg that you know is a heritage fruit or veg. So there's no hybrid there. Like I'm very lucky. I live near a place called a National Trust place called Dufferin Gardens, and they have a kitchen garden and they grow lots of their own fruit and veg. I bought some heritage tomatoes from them last year and saved the seeds from those. So I know that I'm going to get exactly what I ate last year in this year's growing season.
What are some easy first steps that people could take to lower their waste?
the first thing you should do if you're trying to attempt zero waste is to take stock of what you use and how you use it. Keep a diary even for a couple of weeks of what you're eating, what you're buying, how you're consuming in general, and see what is the one thing or two things that you're using a lot of and you're like, this is ridiculous, how come I've still got so many of these things? Try and see if you can find an alternative for that. So if you're a big coffee drinker and you're getting a lot of takeaway coffees, now I know at the moment with COVID, you kind of need to find a contactless coffee shop, somebody who will still take reusable cups. But in the before times, if you were a big coffee drinker, getting a reusable cup would be the obvious choice. If you drink a lot of bottled water, then getting yourself a water bottle is the obvious choice. Toothbrushes. We all use toothbrushes every single day. Every single plastic toothbrush you've ever used still exists somewhere in the world. Unless it's been incinerated, it still exists. And that is mind-blowing, I think, when you really consider that. So maybe swap from a plastic one or a more traditional one, shall we say, to a bamboo toothbrush. For the most part, you can recycle that and you've immediately reduced the amount of waste, even just in that item. It's just looking at your life and seeing where you can reduce. Another thing that people often do when they start with zero waste, because the two things are so interlinked, zero waste and going plastic free, is they immediately throw out all of their Tupperware or all of their Chinese food boxes that they've had from takeouts over the years. Don't throw those things out. Don't throw anything out. Use the stuff you have. And then when it depletes, when you've finished using it, like say, for example, you've got a whole pile of shampoo bottles or whatever, recycle those things or dispose of those things appropriately and then replace them with something better, something packaging free or in something like cardboard or glass or tin. But don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't throw everything out straight away, because that in itself is a waste, and that's value that you're throwing away as well. You're throwing away stuff that you've already paid for. It seems like that's a huge waste in some way. Basically, use everything that you have currently, assess what things you use a lot of, see if there is an alternative for that thing, and if there isn't, maybe consider whether you actually need it or not. Can you reduce the amount that you are consuming of that thing? You can go to your local zero waste store if you have one. And they're definitely growing. It's a phenomenal thing, but not everybody has access to a zero waste store. And unfortunately, because they're independent stores, they're not necessarily in the price range of everybody either, So like one of the things that people think about the zero waste movement is that it's a very white middle class thing. And to a certain degree, yes, that is the case. People with privilege have been able to adopt this lifestyle a lot quicker and a lot easier. But that doesn't mean that has to stay that way. What we need to see is intersectionality, and we need to see accessibility for people from all backgrounds and all environments, that they can get involved with this. And that's why, once again, like I'm a privileged white woman who's doing zero waste, absolutely. But what I hope I'm getting across is that there are lots of things that you can do frugally. You can repair things, you can find a new use for an old thing, that you don't have to spend stacks of cash on all of these things. And if you don't have access to a zero waste shop in your local area, that you can still reduce your waste by buying in bulk at the supermarket. So rather than buying, if you can't get the thing in, pasta is the best example I have. Luckily these days pasta is coming in cardboard boxes, but buying it in cardboard boxes will only be, say, 500 grams, which isn't that much, might be more expensive. If you buy the big plastic bag of it for 3 kilos for whatever price, that might suit your budget a bit better. So you're reducing your waste, you're still living within your budget, and it works for everybody in that regard. Don't get me wrong, I think having zero waste shops is brilliant, but it doesn't suit everybody's budget and it doesn't suit everybody's lifestyle, because it requires them to go to an additional shop. If they have 2 jobs, 3 jobs, they're caring for people at home, they're just exhausted from working incredible long hours themselves, or they're like me, they've got 2 tiny babies and no time to be going to 4 different shops. You want it to be just in one place that you can go and you know that you're trying to do your bit and you're reducing your impact. As much as I love the zero waste shops, I think it's really important that the supermarkets really get on this bandwagon and really start to roll out refillable sections themselves. It's done all over Europe. I lived in Sweden for a couple of years and they had basically zero waste shops in their shop. All of the fruit and veg was packaging free. The nuts and grains and pastas and everything were in those gravity bins, and you could bring your own containers and do it that way. It doesn't have to be this massive upheaval. It can be done, and it can be done effectively and efficiently.
I think zero waste is quite radical as well, because you are saying, no, I don't need all these products. No, I don't need to continually buy things. You know, I'm self-sufficient to some degree. And I think that's quite radical, you know, in our modern society. How can people use their food scraps? I think oftentimes the idea of composting is quite overwhelming.
What you can do with your food scraps are many things. You can make soup. I know that sounds mad, but like we'll often cut the broccoli heads off the broccoli, right? And then we're left with a stalk, and that just goes straight in the compost or straight in the kitchen waste bin. You can put it in a soup. There's still stacks of nutrients in that stalk. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing. It mightn't be the most appealing thing to look at, but you can cook with it, and you can keep all your onion peels and things like that and make stock. And it takes a little while, but like, you know, if we are flexitarian in this house, so we do eat meat, and if we have any fish or chicken bones, we'll make a stock out of that, and then you can freeze that and add it to your cooking later on. You can look at, for example, if you're peeling potatoes or carrots or any root veg, you can make crisps and just bake them, you know, or roast them, and you'll get some very nice crisps. Or you can think about regrowing. When you're chopping your onion, hang on to the bit that has the little roots. Don't chop it right down to the very end. You know, leave about centimetre and a half above the root. This is the same with all of the things as well. So if you've got celery or leeks, leave a good like 2 centimeters max above the root base, and then just pop it into a dish of water, leave it on your windowsill for a couple of days, and it will start to sprout roots. It's amazing. I'm always amazed when I see it. I'm like, it's actually done it again. Once the roots kick off, it goes really quick, and you'll start to see the stalks going up then as well. So you'll start to see little pyramids of onion coming up, and when it gets to a big enough size, you can actually just put it in the ground and it will start to grow a bulb again. It's incredible. Like, I've done it mostly with leeks and celery, and the flavor has been quite different actually. It's been a lot more strong. Like it's been a really intense flavor, but yeah, you can. It's crazy. And this is the thing, like there's a lot we can do with food waste, and food waste is one of the major issues that we face with regards to climate change. And you don't even need to have a garden to do it. You can do it in little pots on your windowsill, or just keep them in the water, like especially with things like spring onions. You just keep them in the water. And it also leads to kind of frugal living as well, because not that spring onions are particularly expensive, but you buy one bunch of it, and then you don't need to necessarily buy any more, because you're just keeping that going, you know? Like, I know that sounds really stingy, but like every little helps, you know? You're getting that extra bit out of your scraps. You're getting extra value out of the food that you've bought as well. So it's a good thing. But then what do you do with those once you've done the stock? If you will still have bits, put it in the kitchen waste. Composting, there are loads of great small composting bins that will fit in most gardens. And if you have the space for it, you just throw it in. You literally throw it in and you just leave it there for a couple of weeks, and eventually you'll get some compost. The microbes and worms and creatures that are in there will just do the work for you. And it's really not that complex. The complexity is mostly with regards to having the space, I think, you know. So if you have the space, I 100% recommend composting. It's a great way of making sure that the plants and fruit and veg that you're growing, if you're doing that kind of thing, have really rich organic matter to feed them. Like it's the perfect circular economy, taking the food that you're eating, turning it into soil to grow more food. It's perfect, but you just need a little bit of space. If you don't have space and you want to do a bit of an experiment, then I recommend trying a worm bin. We've just been having a bit of fun with it. I just had an old plastic actual kitchen waste bin that the previous owners of this house had left there, and it was just cluttering up some space in the back garden. So I drilled some holes in it. A friend of mine down the road has a compost heap, so he just gave me some worms from his compost heap, and that was it, you know. And I don't know if I did an IGTV or if I did a highlight of how to make a wormery. I have done some updates since then showing how the little guys are doing.
What are some zero waste gimmicks that are being sold that people should keep an eye out for?
There's a lot of people making a lot of money off it, and there's a lot of companies that are trying to jump on the bandwagon. Kind of have to question it and be a conscious consumer. Don't just fall for the clever picture with the, oh, there's a house plant behind it. Oh, it's so pretty. It's like, do you actually need it? Is this something that will actually help in your life? Or is it something that's just going to end up at the bottom of your bag or the back of the cupboard? I did have something that I would honestly recommend for all the people who have sanitary needs. You cannot go wrong by getting reusable sanitary ware. I was very much against it for a very long time because as an Irish person, we do not talk about these things. It completely changed my life. It made my period just such a dream. You almost forget that you're like, I use a cup and I use pads as well occasionally, and they're so much more comfortable than the disposable ones. They're so much more comfortable than tampons. If of any of the reusable items, if there was one reusable item I could encourage people who menstruate to use, it's reusable sanitary ware, because it's just the best thing. For everybody else, get yourselves a reusable water bottle. That's all you need. The amount of pesticides that's used in the cotton and the amount of bleach that's used in the cotton, and then you're putting all that stuff inside, it's just not a good idea. And the amount of money we spend on that kind of product every year is insane. And when we're talking about period poverty, for example, it's just, yes, menstrual wear can seem like a big expense up front, but really £18 for a cup. I think a lot of them are a lot less now, versus 60 quid for the year times your whole menstrual cycle life. It makes it like one cup will last you 10 years. Do you know that kind of way? It just makes total sense to me.
Why do you think that zero waste has become a thing? There's such a movement around it online.
Before Blue Planet 2, I had heard about zero waste, and I had a few friends who were dabbling. We're all addicts now. But then you start talking about it and saying, oh, well, I'm doing it because I'm aware of the plastic problem in the oceans. You've got a real problem. There are creatures washing up on shorelines all around the world with bellies full of plastic, and it's heartbreaking. And this is one small thing I can do to help reduce that. It's a drop in the ocean, but it's something. And then Blue Planet 2 happened. Everybody watched it. And everybody saw the devastation. And then they finally saw the devastation around them. They looked out their windows and they were like, my goodness, there's litter all over our path. Why is there litter on our path? Why are we allowing this to happen? Why are our beaches, our beautiful open spaces, why are we allowing people to just neglect them and think that it's okay to just dump their stuff everywhere? Like, this is not right. Seeing those animals suffering because of our just complete lack of care, or our complete apathy, like, oh, it's grand, somebody else will deal with it. Seeing how nature was suffering as a result of that, I think that really resonated with people, and they were like, okay, what can we do? People like Greta Thunberg started appearing, and the School Strike for Climate just took up so much media space because it was this young girl doing this thing. She was talking to people in the UN. It was like, what is this? Who is she? And people started to listen. And then people started, I think, to push back, and they were like, what does it matter if I have a coffee cup? It doesn't matter at all. And then I think the thing that got those people was talking to them about how much money they could save. You're not just saving the environment. It's not just about doing a courtesy for your environment and people around you and the world around you, but you can actually save a lot of money, because people like Starbucks were saying, bring your own cup, we'll give you 50p off. Pret, you can have a coffee for £1 in one of our takeaway cups, or you can have it for 49 pence in your own cup. You start talking to people's hearts, then you start talking to people's wallets. People start to realize that there are different ways of doing things. And then it became quite trendy, I think. Everybody was going around with their fancy glass coffee cups, and it became quite a symbol, a status symbol or something like that. I don't know. But either way, I was like, whatever works. If that means that you're going to use a tote bag instead of a plastic bag, I'm all for it. You can think it's trendy. I don't care. As long as there's less plastic around, this is great. Trends are a good thing, I think, especially if they are a force for good, if they make people reassess what they're doing in their everyday life. We're seeing it with Black Lives Matter at the moment, that like people are realizing that the way they engage with society isn't necessarily that great. And it doesn't mean that they're bad people, but it's like, oh, I need to reassess how I am and what I'm doing and how I'm having an impact in the world around me. What can I do to be a little bit better? And I think people really just started doing that. And it's great. People are seeing other people doing it, realizing that it's not necessarily unattainable or an effort. Because I think at the start, people maybe thought that zero waste, it sounds very totalitarian that like, you must have no waste. But then you used to realize that it's like, no, it's just an ideal. It's just something to work towards. And it doesn't have to be stressful. You can find the thing that works for you and you will immediately start to see a reduction in your waste. And that's, I think people just got it. There are people who are far more vocal about this online than I am. I try to just show people the easy things that they can do to reduce their waste and reduce their impact. But it is all connected to social justice and the climate movement. And we've had an interesting summer here back in May. It was beautiful, hot sunshine, and everybody's delighted because it's like Spain. But if it's like Spain here, then it means that in Spain, it's gotten a lot hotter, and if Spain's hotter, then the Sahara is a lot hotter, and sub-Saharan Africa and people in the developing world are going to feel the brunt of this climate change. We might have a nice beach holiday just outside of our house, but people in the developing world who are already suffering in large areas across the continent are going to get the worst of it again. So it's all connected.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Q&A Talk Show. Tune in 2 weeks for the next show, and we'll speak to you then.